Life is full of both challenging and beautiful moments, and the stories we tell of those times in our lives bring an opportunity to bring such encouragement and hope to those who hear them. The saying goes that we are amazed at people's achievements, but we really connect with people on their vulnerabilities. We have sat around so many tables and heard the most incredible stories of people's perseverance and victory, and our hope is that you would be encouraged on your journey as we broadcast them. This is a place where everybody's story matters. Welcome to the Journey Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Journey Podcast. I'm sitting here with Deb Pidgeon, our good friend from church, and it's just been so great to meet you and your family. She's also my dog's grandmother. She calls herself Mimi. That's right. And Lola just spent the week there with them, and she loves her grandmother, so that was great. And I just want to welcome you. This is episode 10. Yay. And I just want to thank you for your time. I know you've had a busy weekend and coming in today, you lead a very full life. Yes. And have a lot of influence into a lot of people's lives, and just always grateful for people's willingness to just come in and share, and really trusting that there'll be many people who will be, just impacted by your story.
I love this. I love what you guys are doing.
Oh, thanks.
I just love testimonies. Testimonies are amazing, right?
Yeah, they really are. I think I didn't really even realize how powerful they were until we started. It's like we really believed in that, and we'd sat around and heard all the stories and knew that this is what we needed to do. But even today, just listening to episode 9 again, we always end up watching them as they are released. Right. And I got goosebumps. I just got so excited at their testimony of just reaching the lost in their heart, right? And just going after people, and it encourages me to do the same, because we can get a little complacent and just, that's a little comfortable. And you chat to people who have had a walk, and it's really
got a testimony of what God has done, right?
Exactly.
Right. I was going to, before we got started today, I was going to ask you, I had just a story about a little girl that I wanted to read to you guys. Yes. So if you don't mind, if we could start that way, I would love to start that way.
That would be great.
So I'm going to read this story to y'all, and it's just amazing to me how God works in people's lives. But many years ago, there was a little girl about the age of 10 that found herself abandoned in a small little trailer down a dark, secluded road. She shared this little tiny habitat with her mom after a violent separation with her parents. She was often left alone for days with no food or care and no supervision. She spent a lot of time alone and afraid, but soon found outlets and means how to survive at a skating rink. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
It was there that at the skating rink that she would frequently walk and bum money from the military guys. It was a military town. Unbeknown to her, this would be the pivotal moment in her life that she would learn that how to survive. After being left alone for days, she was walking home late one night from the skating rink. It was a very busy street. Her father had not seen her in over a year, but he seen her walking home this night. He pulled his car over and asked what was she doing. He took her to the tiny little trailer that she lived in. There were no lights, and they could barely see anything. She had no phone to call anybody. How odd that no one had ever noticed this little skinny girl walking the streets in Augusta, Georgia in 1970, right? That evening, when her dad had seen her walking late, he questioned where her mom was, and then he drove her back to the trailer, as I had mentioned, only to find it empty and there was no power. He had most likely been drinking, fussing, and cussing into the wee hours of the night. The young girl grew tired and soon fell asleep in the back seat of her father's car. She awoke only to arrive at her older sister's home in Atlanta.
What?
She had not seen any of her siblings close to a year, and had not seen the sister's home that she was at in many, many years. She had arrived with no clothes, no personal items. She was just very skinny, very little, and there she was in her sister's home with her 4 siblings. Her sister had suffered with depression and lived in affordable housing. The little girl never showed much expression. By the time she was 10 or 11 years old, she learned how to hide her feelings. She lived with her sister for a few years, just above poverty, and she learned quickly how to follow the rules and care for the other children in the home. This environment was chaotic and abusive. Her sister suffered with mental illness and was in and out of the hospital for suicide attempts. Her 5 siblings were very scattered, She was the baby, and most of them had found their own way in life. One sister was forced to marry at the age of 15 somewhere in California. She had not seen her in a long time. Their home was full of alcoholism, domestic violence, abandonment, and sadly, the young girl was molested. At an early age, she was often left alone with her half-brother, who spent years instilling fear, tormenting animals, and sexually abusing her. Her mother abruptly came back into her life at 14. They moved into a tiny little apartment after much arguing with her older sister.
Wow.
She was getting a supplement, I believe. That year with her mother was a very joyful year. Her mother had stopped drinking and she worked hard as a waitress. Her sister had returned from California with her 2 babies, but was now divorced. They were still very poor, but life began to look better for her. Or so she thought. Just having her mom seemed like a dream, but that quickly changed. Her mother died suddenly while she was at school. She had to leave the tiny apartment that they lived in and was yet again scattered. She lived with her father for a very short time, but that was also hectic and domestic. She wondered if the uncertainty of life would ever become stable for her. The only possession she had after her mom died was her mom's car. Wow. She soon found out that was a safe habitat for her. After her mom's passing, she lived with her dad, but she was soon abused by her stepmother. She violently attacked her, pulling her hair almost bald, just close to her 16th birthday. She ran away with her mom's car and found herself sleeping in the back seat of her car. But at least she had the car. That's what she thought, right? She slept in a gymnasium parking lot and found safe places to live. A coach at her school had helped her get her mom's Social Security, so now she had an income and a car. She was on cloud 9, I believe, don't you think? She would bounce from friends' homes, couch surf, and until she found a room to rent. She worked and went to school and was completely on her own at a young age with no guidance. By the time she was 17, she had lived in over 20 homes, a few states, and was full of insecurities. She had learned to survive in almost every situation. After making others, she made many laugh because she hid behind her fears. She tried desperately to avoid the path her parents had taken, but soon found herself in the same trap. Her dreams at night were nightmares. She had never known anyone to die but her mom. Losing her mom at 15 was just too much. Becoming pregnant at 17, she was afraid and had no one to call, so she called her dad. He demanded that she have an abortion, and she did. She was dropped at the abortion clinic and left there for 12 hours alone after being signed in by her father. It was a horrible experience for this young woman. She married right out of high school to the only person that had been consistent in her life. However, her marriage had suffered the same patterns she grew up in. The fall of 1983, she had carried too much for too long and left everything, including her 2-year-old.
Wow.
She found herself in a dark place, examining her life at 23. She contemplated suicide and made several reckless attempts to do that. Thank God it was not successful. Facing divorce and becoming a single mom was more than she could bear. Although she had survived many years, she learned later it could only have been by the grace of God that at the age 25, she met Jesus.
Wow.
It was that day that her life had changed under a small tent in Metter, Georgia. The day she met Jesus and heard the story of him, everything in her was healed. For the first time she heard about Jesus and her purpose, everything changed for her. Excuse me, I got to get some water.
Go for it.
I'm reading here. So I think about these stories and these people that go through these things, and you see people so polished and so together.
Yeah.
So that's why I like sharing these stories like this, right? All right. So she lived 25 years in such pain and abandonment. She had never heard the story of Jesus. She only knew of Jesus as a baby in a manger and born of a virgin. And that was so hard to understand. She had never been inside a church, never been told anything. No one had ever prayed for her. But I just want to tell you today, that little girl is sitting right in front of you. That little girl's me. Yeah. And I am so glad to tell that story. Sometimes it seems painful to tell that story, but I want to finish saying this. It says, God kept me. And I know that during that time when I was abandoned and I was tormented and molested and left alone without parents and no guidance, there was something that I knew existed. I just didn't know what it was. I had not met Jesus yet. And under that tent in Metter, Georgia, when I first heard the story by accident, the story of Jesus, I'm telling you, radically, I was saved. And every pain, every incident, everything that I had gone through totally was healed instantly. I know it don't happen for a lot of people that way, but Denise said it did. It happened for me.
Wow.
I am now a powerful, anointed woman of God. I've overcome the fear of abandonment, and I'm accepted and approved by God. I stand before you victorious. I am not a victim. We hear a lot of people that go through things like this, and you never want to hang your hat on that you're a victim. You're just not. This may sound like a very horrific story to people, and it was. I lived it.
Yeah.
But I can tell you there's more horrific stories. But God is in it. He's in it to pull people through these kind of things, and that you're on the other side of that. I was thinking about when I was coming here, I said, I get a little anxious when I go to tell my story, and that's why I kind of tell it in a story way.
Yeah.
So if you notice, when I first started out, I'm a little nervous about it because it's like, you remember that little girl, but then as you begin to read it and process it, you're like, wow, look what God has done. So I just want to share, I'm a wife of 44 years, a mother of 2 kids, 6 grandkids. God has given me back everything and more that the enemy tried to steal. I have gone on to be an advocate for abused women, a case manager for a homeless shelter, a counselor for women in crisis, and a pro-life liaison. I'm an author, a blogger, a public speaker, a growth coach, and I've worked in mental health, drugs, and alcohol, and I'm retired from the school system.
Wow.
So God was able to take someone like me, so broken, so shattered, and he told me who I was, and he lifted me up out of places that others would, if they didn't know him, could have just totally been destroyed.
Yeah.
So I love sharing that story. My husband and I were marriage ministers, and we love sharing the joy of Jesus with people. We love keeping families together, marriages together. So people say, where do you get your passion from?
Yeah.
I say, Jesus. I was rescued. I watched a family be completely torn apart. I watched alcohol destroy families. I watched abuse. So when you see those things and you witness those things, it's real easy to step into and fight for others that are in that. Especially when you know God's on your side.
Yeah.
And God's on your side.
It was so hard to hear that story because I haven't heard it before like that. And I've known snippets of your story, but not all those details. And it made me just tear up thinking you're a daughter. And there you were, this skinny little thing wandering the streets and coming home to a dark house. And I think of my daughter and what that would be like for her. She's got the joy of having her light on at night, and I love to feed her, and just those things that you had to walk through, and just thinking of who you are now. Right, we get the privilege of seeing the fruit of what the Lord has done in your life, and how you've created such a home. You have all these amazing little dogs, and and a granddaughter that you love so much, and you do so much for Kennedy. I know you're pouring so much into her life and just love her so much, and all your grandkids. I mean, Kennedy lives here, so I see the most of her. But just how the Lord has really just used your life in the most amazing way, and how there's no bitterness in you. And like you said, I mean, that is a tragic story to hear those things that you've walked through. And to see the victory that you're walking in now.
And he's such a redeeming God.
Yeah.
There's so much to the story. It's not so much of that. It's from that what took you to this.
Exactly.
Right?
So what are some of those fruits? Like if you think between like you found Jesus, and were you and George married there, or did you get married after that?
We were married. We separated for a year and a half.
Yes.
And I just totally left.
Yeah.
I just left.
He was in the military, right?
He went in the military. My daughter ended up with my dad for almost a year and a half. She was 2 years old.
Okay.
I was probably the worst I'd ever been in my life. I seriously just did not want to live. Yeah. And I did things that were very reckless, attempted suicide twice. Thank God that didn't happen, right? Yeah. But you're just in such a state of mind. You don't, and that's why I can understand when people are there, when they're in those depressed states and you're trying to figure out your purpose in life. But even through those times, I'm just telling you, there was something that I knew. I just couldn't put my finger on it. I was searching for that purpose. You couldn't find it through money. You couldn't find it through love. You couldn't find it through relationships. You couldn't find it through your children. It was only through him. And when I heard the story of Jesus, all I can tell you is I know that I came alive. And everything that was buried down deep inside, everything that I had hid, I was a very funny person. So behind all the funny was this very sad girl, because I knew I went to my car and my blanket at night alone. So a lot of people in high school, we go back to our reunion, they never even knew. They sort of knew something, but they didn't know nothing. Because I was just very private, and I was afraid what would happen if somebody did know.
Yeah, where would you have to go?
But those fruits are this, is that my dad never showed us anything about Jesus. I was able to lead my dad to the Lord. It's crazy, and was able to take care of him.
That's amazing.
The latter days of his life. He lived with me and George off and on, and he just loved the Lord. He would go through our cow field in Georgia and sing with George and praise and worship, and everybody just loved my dad. He was Pop Willie, he ended up in a wheelchair, and so... And he got baptized with my son, Joshua, and even my stepbrother that molested me. God is just so gracious in all things. He called for me on his deathbed.
Wow.
And I had a choice. I could go or not go. He had served some time in prison for exactly what he had done to me, not for me, but for someone else. And he went on to hurt other children. But when he called for me, I went. He'd written me a letter a couple of years prior to that and asked me to forgive him. And I had already forgiven him. It was already done. So I went. And that was my husband was like, "You're not going. I don't want you to go there. This is too much. You're going to relive this." And I said, "You know what? I have so forgiven him. And if that's going to bring him peace in his last moments or days or whatever God's given him, I'm going to go be with him." And I did, and I stood with him as my brother took his last breath. And and that is only by the grace of God. That is only by the grace of God.
Yeah, that is only by the grace of God.
Because there's no way Debbie could have done that on her own. And it doesn't
reminds
make...
me of that story of Corrie ten Boom, who saw, after she'd been in the concentration camps with the whole Jewish, all of that, and she was standing somewhere ministering, and one of the guards who had done terrible things to her family and to her came up to her and said, "You won't remember me," but she was basically apologizing to her, and in her heart she said she had a choice, and she knew that she couldn't do it, but that it was the Lord through her that could. And I'm sure it brought him peace, because I can imagine he was just tormented by that. And
it was not to bring, that's not to bring any glory to me. It was not at all. To me, when I stood with him, I'm just telling you, I had so much compassion. I thought, he went through life so hurt, and nobody ever got him help. He never got the help. And I know that when he went to prison, he was very tormented.
I'm sure.
And, but it was just a change in me. And I don't know that the years prior that I hated him or held it against him, because I buried it so deep. Denise, it didn't even show back up until I was 25 years old.
Wow.
And so, you can suppress things for a very long time. And then when they do surface, thank God you have God, right? Because you don't want those things to come up without him.
It's almost by his grace that it never resurfaced until you were in the place to be able to
he kept me sheltered.
That through.
Kept me sheltered. And those other fruits are, I've led one of my grandsons to the Lord. All my nieces and nephews are saved. My sisters got saved.
Wow.
They are all serving the Lord, and they all just love Jesus. And, I was talking to you the other day about, years after being saved, I was just thinking, here we are, me and George, our whole family thought we was all weird and lost our mind. We're in a cult, because we were like these crazy people. And then all of a sudden we're just loving Jesus, and we're like these radical people. So they, they didn't even want to hang out with us because we couldn't do the same things.
Thought you'd lost the plot.
Right. So, but, the love just brought them over, the grace brought them over and brought them over into, that atmosphere. And then they just received Jesus. But, I attribute a lot that to my grandmother. It's actually my great-great-grandmother. My aunt gave me her Bible. I was about to speak at a woman's conference, and she said, "I'm mailing something to you." And she said, of all the ones, you're the one that deserves this. And she didn't believe. She wasn't a believer. Now, she was by the time she passed, because I went and seen her a lot. And so she'd say, "Where's your Jesus at?" And I go, "He's right here. He's right here." But anyway, and in that Bible, there was, and I still have it, there was those prayers. Those prayers before I was ever even born.
Wow.
Those prayers prevailed.
I was actually speaking to somebody about that on Sunday, who was saying that she had chatted with someone who all of the family members were saved, and she was just marveling at this and trusting the same for her family. And she said that every generation there'd been someone who was like that armor bearer who would pray and pray, and then they would almost pass the baton on to the next generation to do the same. And it really encouraged me to really pray for my children and their children and for the generations.
That's right.
And I know my mom and even Fred's mom, there's been a lot of prayer in our families, but to not just let it stop there, to carry that on, because it's important that we.
That's right.
Yeah.
She prayed it in. She prayed it in. And I looked through her Bible, and there's like little writing and stuff in there that she had wrote. The Bible's like really old. I got it in this really secure bag because it's just precious to me.
Aww.
But it took me forever to find the Bible, even after I got saved. I told you the other day, I went to a hotel. I couldn't find a Bible. I went to a hotel and I said, I know you'll have Bibles in here. Can I just get a Bible? Because from the time I heard the gospel, I had 2 weeks before the next, they were having another tent thing, right? Saved under a tent. Can you imagine? And I was just really so mad. I don't know how to explain it. When you hear, some people get these different revelations. When I heard the story of Jesus, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is the purest love. This is what I've been looking for. Why hasn't anybody ever told me? All you heard was the commercial side of Jesus, right? Baby in a manger, born of a virgin. Okay, well, if you live in the world, you're thinking that's far-fetched. And if you'd never heard of Jesus, I was 25 years old before I ever heard the gospel. 25. So people say, you're radical. I'm like, you need to ask people, do you know Jesus? And if they don't, then you need to tell them about him. So it was pretty crazy. But those 2 weeks, I was working with some pretty partying people up in Atlanta.
Wow.
So I went back in, and I was just not the nicest person. And I just said, do y'all know Jesus? And they said, yeah. And I said, so you were just going to let me go to hell? Really? Is that what you were going to do? Just let me go to hell? And, because they went at 5 o'clock with me too, at 5 o'clock somewhere. That's what you did when you worked in Atlanta and worked in sales. So everybody went to go have their little cocktail in the afternoon. And so they were right there propped up with us. They didn't look any different. They didn't talk any different. But I knew they went to church because they talked about it. But that was all they talked about, church, not Jesus. And they didn't look any different. So I tell people, you know what? We're the only Bible that some people will read. We're the only love sometimes that someone will know. So it's real important that we are close to him so that we can show others how much he loves us, how much he loved us and still loves us. And he's there interceding for us every day. And he laid his life down, right? I mean, I don't know many people that lay their life down the way he laid his life down.
And I'm sure that it would have been on the Lord's heart for somebody to embrace you from a much younger age, to just to help and to be there. And and I know that you'd mentioned that you had exchange students. Like there was something else really wonderful that came out of it. You didn't just have your own kids, but you made a home for other kids as well.
Well, I feel like I was the late bloomer in Jesus, like it was later on in life at 25, never grew up. So there was just a lot of things. I didn't have any regrets at all. I loved being a wife and a mother, and those were things I just dreamed of being. And then when I became those, it was just, I just loved church. I loved going to church. I loved singing. I can't sing, but I love singing. And I love going to church. And I told George, we just got to do more. There's so many people that don't know the Lord. And he was like, well, Deb, you do it all the time. We're out asking people all the time, And I was like, well, it's not a measure, not like counting how many people you bring to the Lord. And I said, but how can we make a really, really big impact? Not just here in our community, but this is a global. How could you? So you're married, you got kids, and so you can't really go on mission, be in the mission field. But you are in the mission field, right? Right in your own home. So I just looked up for exchange students, and I started bringing exchange students into our home, and we would have them for an entire year.
Wow.
We had almost 17 students in like 20 years. Kids always came through our home. I began to place them. Some of those kids are now in ministry.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, in the mission field. So, it's just the seeds that God just gives you, and you just keep throwing them out there, and you just trust him to let those things go far to the lands where they're supposed to be. And I'm still in relationship with a lot of those kids. They're adults now with children of their own and serving the Lord.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing.
That's
and we
so
stay
special.
in touch with each other. Yeah.
And George has got a big ministry to homeless people.
He does. We have a big heart for that. And I'm currently doing stuff as a case manager at a women's shelter in St. Augustine. And, I just have a heart for those young women that are single that, and that's the whole purpose in them, is that them to know Jesus. That's to get them established. I think, gosh, if I'd have had something like this, there's no telling what I'd have turned out, which I think I'm turned out. I turned out great, right? I love Jesus and it's okay. I've done a lot of things in life. I have done and been a lot of things in life.
You're definitely making up for lost time.
I think about, I've been a children's pastor. I've done interim youth pastor, women's ministry, and I've traveled the world. And I've been able to just share the love of Jesus. And I love sharing the love of Jesus. That's all I'll talk about is Jesus, is because it's the most important thing in our life. Not that we don't live life, and that's reality. I get it. But the whole purpose here, we just talked about that in Kentucky this past weekend. Why are we here, and what are we doing while we're here? And what kind of an imprint are we going to leave? Yeah. And it's not that you're trying to prove anything to anybody. You're here. When you leave a room, you want them just to say, wow, I felt something. And it's not you that they felt. It's the love of God that they felt. And I think sometimes we get a little tired. We get a little weary because we're living in a crazy time. But he chose us for this. He equipped us for this.
And he redeemed you. I mean, it doesn't matter what your story is. That is what we're called to do. But I know there's always this like extra measure of zeal in someone who has just walked out of such a background like that and had such a radical transformation. It's like, why would you not want everyone to jump on board and then get frustrated? There's like this frustration in a good way at the silence or at the fear of man, actually, because that's what it comes down to. It's fear of man that would stop you from sharing that.
That's interesting that you brought that up, because that's one of the things I do tell women, and I love ministering to women. I do a lot of coaching with women, and I love it, is that just don't worry about what other people are thinking. Don't compare yourself to other moms, to other wives. You are so unique. And God made you in such detail, and that he has a specific purpose for you, just like you were saying about your children and that legacy and the legacy from there and how it goes on and on and on, and your imprint and what it's going to make in Jenna's life and Jonathan's life and your grandchildren that are to come, right? So it's just be in that moment. Don't worry about that. Don't compare yourself. That's one of the biggest things I see with young women, and I did it too. We have got to be so immovable. We just cannot live in that kind of a state as a godly woman. We have to abandon those thoughts, really run from them, rebuke them. I mean, and put ourselves in that atmosphere and community with other women that believe that way, so we can gird one another up and just be that strength within our families. Lifting our husbands up. Come on now. We got to lift them up and remind them who they are, because the world is constantly tearing them down, right? And I know it's not always perfect at home. I know that. We do marriages, so we understand. George and I are married. Yeah. But when we realize that we're not each other's enemy, we're not the enemy. You're not my enemy, and no one else is out here as our enemy. When me and George realized that was when our lives changed radically. We stopped the fighting as much. We still have a little tiff here and there, but we know now better how to unplug. Yeah. I really have a peace. I'm not moved by things. Our president gets shot the other day. Yes, that is sad. It's terrible, but we know God is still on the throne. We know that he is still in control, right? Doesn't matter who's leading this country. We still need to pray. It's still wrong. Those things are still wrong. We see a lot of wrong, right? But we still have to be that person that says there is hope. Yeah. And we have to keep and not moved, not shaken. So when the storms come, we're ready. Yes. Right? We're ready.
Yeah. And to equip ourselves as well. And I was actually just thinking, if you would like to look at any of Deb and George's marriage, just information and teachings, and they have a lot of things available. We can put the links below. Yeah. But just thinking back on that story now and just knowing you and your life. Right. Just want to thank you so much for just sharing a snippet. I know that there's so much more to your story, and I know that there's been healings and miracles and all kinds of things that have taken place. Right. But just alone, even just your family coming to know the Lord, and just the miracle of who you are, that you lived through those things. Yeah. But now you get to, from a place of strength, reach out your hand and help so many people walking through their stories. Right. And, that's the beautiful ripple effect. That's right. Yeah. That's how the Lord uses the brokenness, but the breakthrough. Yeah.
And those are not the things that identify us. No. Right?
Yeah.
It's part of your story, but that's not who I am. No. Right? It's the things that God has used to help me overcome.
Yeah. And it's what gives you a heart. And it's how you can relate to people, because it's you can understand where they are, but you can also say, hey, look, there's more.
Right. Yeah. And it does, because people see you. They see you all cleaned up, all polished, so strong. marriage is great, you know, all those wonderful things. But behind the scenes, there's been lots of spiritual battles, lots of spiritual fights. And it really was not our battle to begin with.
Yeah.
We just had to surrender and submit to him and just watch him do it.
Yeah.
And then you see the fruits of your labor. You see the faithfulness that you just had, this hope that you knew that no matter what, God's got you. And then that mindset just changes. Your heart changes. And like I said, when standing with my brother, there was just so much compassion. And I think about that now. I was just thinking about when I said it to you, that it had to just be God.
Yeah.
It had to be God. I had all the reasons in the world to be mad and upset and bitter. I did, but it had to just be God, that change of heart, that change of mind. So when he does change your mind, everything changes, right? Your heart changes.
That's
you
true.
have so much mercy towards people. If we just be a little kinder, everybody's going through stuff. Everybody's going through a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah.
And we don't need to really understand. We really don't. We just need to love.
Yeah.
God understands it all. There's no way we don't even need to be relatable to it.
Yeah.
We don't want to be relatable to a lot of things.
Yeah,
I don't want nobody to relate to what I've gone through, right? We want to prevent that.
Yes.
That's what we want to do. That's why I'm an advocate for all of that.
Yeah.
And we'll fight to the day I die.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And just commend you and honor you for all the work that you are doing, and just pray that there'll be many more incredible stories and fruit of all the work that you have done and continue to do. Yeah. And thank you for sharing your story today.
Love you. Thank you for having me.
Too.
Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today with Deb. And I just encourage you to check out those links below if you'd like to know more of what her and George get up to and all the resources that they have to share. And we will see you again next week for episode 11. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Journey podcast. I hope that you were encouraged and that you would have a really great week just reflecting on what we've spoken about today. If you have a story that you feel needs to be shared to encourage those who listen, please would you write a comment in the comment section below and we will reach out to you via email. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to the next episode of the Journey podcast next week.